All right, in this demo, I'm going to just kind of go through the OA code that's now underneath the previous two demos. So the first demo we showed it running out. The next one we showed how we modeled it out and how we were able to generate it. The next step is we actually looked at what was going on within the actual source code for that project itself. The project itself, we showed how the MVC was all set up, and also like ORM, the remoting, the communication between them and stuff like that. And all of that is available through OA. So if we look at OA, it's organized in a way so it's specific to its function. It's also set up so that it's organized and like puzzle pieces, so how they all fit together. And the basis behind everything is back to the observable object. So by having an observable object or observable collection of objects, you're able to do things so that they can stay in sync. So if something changes, they automatically update each other. If you then take it a step further and you say you want them to be able to work with a data source of some kind using like an ORM or other kind of interface like that, have it automatically interact with that. It gives you another level of functionality that's very helpful. And then taking another level is how can you have them work across servers? So there's a communication layer, and on top of that, there's also a remoting layer. So communication layer is always helpful, but if you can remote on top of that, just like it's a regular method call from the either browser or from the from a Java app or service or whatever, it automatically calls another system and brings it back. So another part of all that goes along with this base OA object is how it serialization capability, how it's actually able to manage deltas, manage what data goes on the wire, and be really efficient about it. So under the hood, there's some stuff going on. There's also some annotation metadata that's also kind of included in there. That's helpful through all that process, but it's pretty small, pretty lightweight, self-explanatory. So as we go through it, so there's a communication layer, concurrent layer, because of threading. Some things could actually be batched up. They could be in a queue. They could be in what's called a change queue. A change queue is basically, if something changes and you want to refresh it every single time it changes, it could be, getting changed, multiple times, while it's updating itself and basically out of date before it comes back. So stuff like that, but lots of things that support the patterns of how you want to concurrently do things. Also within the COM layer is on top of the communication layer, and what we just talked about as far as the concurrency is on how your objects stay in sync, which we're going to get to down here, but there's a remoting layer that's also on the way there. So I'm kind of jumping around just a little bit here just so we cover that. So on top of the communication layer, again being independent of what's going on with the actual wire protocol, it supports many different kinds, and it's set up so that a new one would be easy to implement. On top of that is we're also able to do remoting, and from that remoting code, we're able to then have a JavaScript method automatically call any other method on any other system, as if it was a local call just on that system. The sync package, what that does is that allows our OA objects and collections of OA objects, we call them hubs, to stay in sync across servers. And that's basically using the remoting capability and the observability capability of the OA objects. So if something's changed and it's not a standalone app, other apps can know about it. So the synchronized part of it is if a customer object's changed in any way, that could automatically be changed across platforms. So the same customer object used someplace else will stay in sync. It also handles things like performance-based type, large volume changes and stuff like that, how all that gets managed for efficiency. It also knows things and has things set up in there for back pressure throttling, obviously for logging and managing, monitoring what's going on at that lower layer of communication and activity. Context is basically, we haven't talked about this, but the running app that we looked at has things like, a user, a employee, that's the actual context that the application's running under, and that could also be set up, and we didn't do that in the model, but there's a lot in that model that we looked at that defines the actual permissioning of what the user that's logged in, or the context, in this case, it could be a running application, has for certain things. And the application is automatically set up to use that, to monitor all that from the UI side to actual permission sides on what methods and functionality can be done. The DS side is for data source, and there's a whole section in here for different types. But at the higher level within data source, you can basically have what's called a OA select, which lets you basically query your objects. And at this layer, you can just query your objects and filter your objects, and it will basically figure out, how to actually go get those objects. It could be in a cache, it could be in on another system, it could be just straight through JDBC, it could be on another remote system, it could be on a legacy type system and stuff like that. But again, from our programmer's perspective, we're querying it just like we'd query anything. If it goes to JDBC, because it knows how to form the query and everything else, joins and everything else to make that happen. It also knows how to keep the objects in a cache, how the cache is used, how the references to the cache objects are maintained, and everything else. GC, distributed GCs, all kind of built into our underlying layers also. So the end result, the bottom line with the DS is it just saves us. It makes it really easy to query against our objects, and really a lot of that code we don't even have to write anymore, because our model will actually build out our search UIs, our search objects. We fill out the objects, and that automatically, takes that information from the objects, forms a query, and then uses the OA select to actually get the objects and send those through. So. Functions are basically allow us to use functional type things like, summing, filtering, stuff like that. Again, it's built into our queries, built into how our objects and everything works, so it's pretty straightforward. The hub is what I mentioned, our observable collection class that allows a collection to be observed, but it also lets you do some things within your collection, like master detail relationships, linking from one collection to another collection. That would be, something very common that you do in a drop-down box. So if you have an employee, you want to know what type of employee they are, and there's 5 different types, that would be the collection. That's the actual drop-down. You can actually form a relationship between those two collections, so that whatever one they select, it will automatically update whatever object of employee object that you're currently on. So again, some more automation there. JFC is just all of the swing components, and pretty much all of them. And we basically build them up to a level of very high functionality. The WYSIWYG editors, reporting tools, a lot of capabilities for rendering, for editing, in-place editing type stuff. Let's see. The JSP basically is for managing your web page type JSP pages and components and stuff within that. Your object is back to, again, what all this is started from and based on is the OA object. Processes allow us to go in and define things like a cron, ways to monitor and define, what processes run and stuff like that. The other interesting thing that's kind of built within OA, again, to help the programmer, is you can build in things to actually monitor and managing your existing system. You can actually build models and stuff like that that are managing your running applications, so you can get really good feedback and stuff like that on there. But this is just some ways to automate, your processes when they run and feedback and stuff like that. Multiplexer is basically a remoting on a layer on top of a TCP connection that allows for concurrency across that single connection. Servlets just similar to, work together with the JSP pages to give us some custom servlets, like managing images, GNLP, JSON, PDF, which is basically the REST stuff is for the JSON, security like SSO, there's XML. So those are some standard ones that we have that's used within the apps and stuff like that. There's also a lot of stuff to manage and help with images, as far as on web pages within the app, editing, flipping them around, some of the normal stuff. And there's also built into the app for managing files, like large files that you could either put in as blobs, but most likely if they're large files that you move around a lot, put that in your file system or in the cloud somewhere or something like that. This has a way of managing all those, moving those from one system to the other and bringing them back, or however all that needs to be managed. Sync we talked about. That's basically the keep your OA objects, observable objects, to sync across multiple applications. Transaction based allows you to start a transaction and do a bunch of stuff, things within your objects and stuff like that, and actually roll it back or commit it and stuff. And it's tied in works well within like the UI type undo, redo type stuff also. Utilities, just a bunch of utility classes. A couple to point out would be converters. Converters basically allow you to convert from one type to another type. Very common scenario is your UI stuff is most of it's string based, so you got to convert it into something else. So there's a lot of stuff for that. Also allow for formatting, masking, and things like that, kind of built into that. Some file helper type stuff. A lot of this is similar, just helper type code. Some image based stuff. Some circular queue is basically a way to have a running queue that will basically kind of circle itself and keep reusing the cells within the queue itself. And then it also has back pressure and overrun handlers and stuff like that. Comparing is basically being able to compare, again, kind of goes back to the different data types that can be formed, converted into something similar that they can compare themselves against. That's pretty common. Converters, date time, Java date's definitely a lot better now, but it's this makes it a lot easier. Data arithmetic, time zone type things. Some of the tricky stuff you get into that can, how you define where dates form from, stuff like that. That's built into the applications. These helper or these utility classes here, date, time, and date, are all helpful with that. Level of encryption, bunch of different filters. You can basically do the equivalent of what you can do in SQL and other query type languages and stuff like that with filters. And these filters will automatically work against your database or your object cache or anything else. So it's pretty cool how these kind of set all that up. HTML, and then we have something called OA templates down here. Those allow you to form the equivalent of templates, which is similar to like JSP tags or other template languages where you can actually embed tags for your model objects, and it will automatically populate those and fill those out for you. So that's pretty powerful. And there's editors and stuff built into the modeling tool and within your running applications, even for users to define those, for like mail merges and stuff like that. Down here, see if I don't skip too much here. There's ways to read and write JSON, read and write XML, YAML, which those play in part of with the REST stuff. There's a mail capability object here that helps a lot. Some networking stuff. PDF using one of the few libraries that we do use is iText for PDF type generation and capabilities. If we embed Jetty, we end up getting a slew of other ones, but it's only used because of that dependency. Here's another one that we kind of want to point out, based on the observability and a lot of the binding and all that stuff, and something that Java's been really strong with almost since the beginning was its reflection. So OA has a reflection library or class here that gives us a lot of capability. And one of the big things is what we call property paths. Property paths lets from one object to another object define a property path, the dot separated path from one object to another, and internally it's going to use reflection, and there's some pretty cool stuff that you can do with that. Strings, a lot of stuff you can do with string, make a lot easier to use and stuff like that. We talked about all this. We got some zip stuff going on, and that's enough of this for now. Appreciate your time. Went through this a lot. It's pretty well true tried and tested library. It's been around for a long time. It's grown and matured, especially in the last couple years. I've done a lot with it. Not so much in this here, but OA Builder itself. There's a lot of code generation that's been added to it. A lot of, especially on the UI capability. And then within here, just we have a whole pack or setup of automated testing that we run against all this. We have a lot of data that's built within those tests to actually test it in a whole bunch of different scenarios and stuff like that, from the communication, remoting, and everything that we talked about through this, and always building on that. But and the other thing is performance. So we always have a way to measure the performance and be able to kind of go in there and lock down on it and isolate it and figure out, where things are being, where time's being spent and stuff like that. So appreciate your time, and this will probably be the end of this series. Thanks.